Welcome back, everyone, to our international meeting on relational sustainability. We should have linked up with us to our people from Córdoba. Are you there?
Hola, buenos días.
Hola, hola María Florencia.
Buenos días.
Hello, María Florencia.
Hola, ¿cómo les va? ¿Qué tal?
Bene, benissimo, grazie. Penso che vi diamo subito la parola perché questo
I think we'll give you the floor right away because this afternoon is a very interesting one, and we will talk about the challenges in food production, and interventions are all on your part, but there will be space for discussion following every conversation. So we immediately give you the floor.
Muchas gracias, un gran saludo a todos. Entonces, les presento a quien me acompaña, el doctor Gabriel Espósito de la Universidad Nacional de Río Cuarto.
So, he's Gabriel Espósito of the University of Rio Cuarto, Argentina. He's here with me, and I give him the floor for the first report. So I'm very happy to share with all of you this what we have done in the south of the province of Córdoba for the last 30 years, which is the center of Argentina, the center of agriculture production. So we are wondering how we generated the production of food and what challenges we are going to face. So we'll see that the problem of food production includes several challenges, and as we can see, the world population is continuing to grow and will continue to grow in the near future. So we can think that the planet will be inhabited with 10 million inhabitants in a few years. We have population growth in recent decades has been increasing, and this growth means that there is population growth in recent decades has been accompanied by an increase also in crop production, mainly based on corn, rice, and wheat. And this population is associated to the feeding of the whole global population. And then, as well as this economic growth continues, what is generated is a greater demand, a greater amount of calories and proteins. And when people have more resources, they consume more proteins and less carbohydrates. So there is a greater request for proteins. So this food production becomes more and more complex, so that the production of food in the agricultural areas in the world becomes difficult. Where you see the red-brown areas, according to the type of ground, they are more appropriate for agriculture. And this is what you see in the map. The Asian population is in great conflict because of the war in Ukraine. They used to provide much grain in the past, and our South American pampas, our plains, It is the third great region in the world for agricultural production. And Pampas is where we are in our region in Argentina. So, when this area have a great production, we have to increase the surface for cultivations. Many forests have been destroyed in order to have higher areas for food production, and this increased the greenhouse effect. And very often ground, some areas are not as fertile as the Pampas, so they are more fragile. Here we see between Chaco and Santiago del Estero, this is a satellite picture from 1984. You see how much green had a picture, and now this is a picture taken in 2020 instead of the other one 1984. So you see the difference between these two pictures, how much aridity, arid areas. Because Argentina used to produce much grain, we produced food for 400 million inhabitants, and there are only 40 million inhabitants in Argentina. So most of our production is for export. These kind of conditions, based on excessive use of soil, brings to this situation of erosion, including water erosion. And the ground by burning material organic exposes ground to rain, and this provokes a superficial crust, and the so-called desertification process is produced. So this created an alternative known as working the soil, and seeds are seeded here, and with much rain that used to break the ground. Now this rain falls, and what was the product of this new technology? That phytosanitary chemical products are used, fertilizers are used, because in the ground a process of chemical contamination is produced. So Argentina, along with other country, out of our features of production, we can say we are the countries with the lowest quantity of carbon production in corn production. This outcome was a research of last year, and which identifies the carbon footprint from corn production, and we see that the chemical fertilizers are the main driver of the impact of the greenhouse effect, especially because of the ureic residual. And this is called precision agriculture. It is using information of easy access to make more efficient what we do in the physical space. We know that the soil is not equal everywhere, so to apply the same technique everywhere would create negative differences. So we need to make maps and in order to do different things in the different areas. So we are trying to apply a specific and directed use of chemicals to be put on cultivation, on weeds, etc. And it is very expensive. And today we have the technology to do this so that we can put a little quantity of chemicals only on weed. This year in the Latin American Congress of Agriculture Precision, we can use more than 50% of our production to understand the environmental impact. So here there is a win-win outcome. Both producers and consumers win. And also robots are used in agriculture. So on the left, you can see solar panel robots, and they go around and they mechanically control the quantity of weed, and they have knives that enable to cut out weeds without the use of chemicals. And this is done with solar panels. So that is through laser machines and also with fire. Electrical energy can be used also with these robots. So the technology used in university developed agronomical models that with these natural variations in the environment can adjust the use of technology in the different places. So we developed analysis according to the type of crops in order to have a best density of seeding, to use the right quantity of phytosanitary products, etc. So these are all steps forward in agriculture. And when we have the opportunity to work, to do experiments in the University of Rio Cuarto, research to assess the effects on agriculture and livestock and rotation cultivation, a member of the team showed that the best way to have the presence of carbon, measure the quantity of carbon in the soil, is to calculate the presence of weed in the countryside. So the pump plane that was generated from natural herbs, we have to reconvert it towards systems that are good for livestock feeding, because these systems renew the fertility of soil, like the quantity of nitrogen, which is one of the main components of fertilization. So instead of using chemical fertilizers, we use this the natural nitrogen. There is the fruit of the wastes, natural waste of animals. But this has to be an oriented process, because if there is only one place where the animals can drink and they can only go there once a day, for example, that's in a corner of the land, look what happens of the presence of phosphorus. It will be present only where there is water, and then it becomes toxic for cultivations. So, and there will be an impoverishment of phosphorus in the rest of the land, because So technological change is having water a bit everywhere for animals to be able to drink. So this was proposed. If we have drinkable water everywhere, there will be the right quantity of this kind of nutrients everywhere. So this circularity in feeding can be ensured. So the animals will generate, before producing meat, they produce cellulose, pulp, and that will provide with energy that we find in carbohydrates, and we can integrate agriculture with the presence of animals, with the hills where they live, and we can regenerate the system in a natural way. And in addition, if we have a uniform agriculture, as the one we have today, sooner or later we'll have to face a massive loss of biodiversity, because there will be only one genetic code, eventually, if we continue like that. So, from the point of view of environment, this continuation is very dangerous. Instead, we should make an alternative proposal. Production, of course, is important, but there are very areas where production is lower. So certainly, in some areas, agriculture cannot be the source of a wealthy production. But what can we do? That we have to let the natural environment regenerate naturally, and that will change biodiversity. This is called as multifunctional landscapes in agriculture. And there are different associations of farmers that are promoting these multifunctional landscapes. So how can we commit ourselves as a society? How should be a strategy of sustainable development in the future? We cannot diminish production. For certain, we have to increase the production of food. But how can we do that? So, if we carry out this work where we use too much grind without giving it the possibility to recover, we lose earth. While with the kind of cultivation that covers the earth, that uses the earth with the previous cultivation, it will be eventually destroyed. So what becomes unavoidable is alternative variable cultivation, mixed systems of production. When I was a student, we learned the agricultural systems based on the circular strategy, which was very productive, it was very good, but we left it aside. We have to recover this circular cultivation and livestock. That's the only way to have a sustainable soil and use the spaces in an economic way. We have to discuss this with all the stakeholders in society. We have to develop strategies according to the territory. I give the example of the province of Mendoza. They say we have to reach a social consensus, and we can imagine how will be the space, the cultural space in the future. And we have to combine the efforts of the whole society to produce food in the best areas, maintain the necessary biodiversity, take care of the quality of water, and then place the trading and the factories in the right places, etc. So how can we build relational sustainability? This is the only way we're acting all together as a society. We can include everyone and generate a space where life has more options. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Grazie infinite.
So, thank you. So we open this space for questions and answer. Now we can see through the chat or personally in the microphone. We want to have a global dialogue.
Grazie infinite al dottor Espósito.
Thank you very much to Mr. Espósito.
Esposizione veramente magistrale.
A very magisterial presentation. I took many notes.
Alcuni spunti molto stimolanti.
I have a few questions,
Lasciare lo spazio
but
che possono essere a Cordoba. Qui abbiamo
maybe you can have in Cordova or here.
Eventualmente per I partecipanti via Zoom. Quindi
Also online.
ad altri interventi. Prego.
We can leave the floor to new interventions. So,
Bien, gracias por tu exposición.
so please go to the table and ask questions.
Quería formularte una pregunta a partir de un conflicto que hemos vivido en Entre Ríos, que es la provincia donde estoy, donde
I'd like to ask a question starting from a conflict which I lived out in Rios, which is the province where I live, where there has been an illegal action on the part of the Corporation of Teachers. This was a demonstration, and in that area there was a conflict, therefore, which then saw a decision on the part of the Supreme Court of Rios to create protection perimeters around the schools in order to avoid the flooding of schools, and also in order to avoid a risk of teachers and against all the violent demonstrations which were really a translation of the fear vis-à-vis these inundations. There was a great display in front of the government home. There were great protests for this decision of the Court of Justice. So, what roads do you see in order to be able to reach a consensus for land policies? Well, there is certainly a conflict because there is a legal requirement. For example, one practice is, aside from other criteria we could use, and the use or abuse of land. Certainly, these items of feedback, which so the items of perimetration have a value, and of course we need to limit this, but this needs to be carried out even in cities which are of larger dimensions. Now, if I go to a village where there is a given legal framework, clearly I need to respect that, because other people might fight for an opposing legal framework, but we can't have these kinds of conflicts. So how can we reach a consensus? There needs to be a dialogue among all. We need to go towards a demonstration which cannot just be an occupation, a squatting in the land or the square or whatever it is. We all know that there are many economic and land-related interests which cross all this. The only solution is to reach a consensus as far as the territorial legal framework is concerned.
No soy una experta en estos temas. Vivo en el norte de la provincia,
I'm not an expert in these themes. I live in the north of the province of Salta. And this year I had the opportunity to get to meet a land which is called Santa Victoria Este, where the conflict between various communities, Huichi and others, is very much open. This conflict is part of a larger South American conflict. A great problem is clearly that of water. There is one in terms of the cost of water. In the last 40 years, we have seen the need for a peaceful dialogue among original and Creole people. But that place, that territory, is always more the object of desertification, because the province of Salta, actually, as far as I know, is one of the provinces that saw a greater degradation and greater devastation in terms of the natural original forest that was there. So for water and consensus in these spaces, I would flag this up. How can we support a consensus, and how can we ensure that these communities who were able to coexist, how can they ensure to new generations a future? Because there are many indigenous populations who do have a future, but how can we ensure that future, and how can we ensure that life of the communities and for the future? Clearly, legal frameworks are important, and it's important that there is a consensus there. Now, in that area, we reached an agreement, but also public policies which allow that consensus that you mentioned. Clearly, that cohabitation needs to be sacred, and therefore it is necessary to guarantee sustainability for the region. Because I think it's a big issue where what we observe in that region. I don't know if you can say something pertaining to this, but it seems a very interesting theme, and your proposal seems also interesting. Certainly, this is all in line with the previous proposal. What we need to bear in mind is the fact that even in the Argentine society, there are many indigenous, originary, autochthonous societies, and the local authority needs to walk in step with those and cannot do without them. And the political groups need to regulate through law, and legislation needs to go beyond economic needs, because economic requirements always wish to proceed towards a greater devastation of these areas. The integration of new lands for agriculture is not admissible, and this has the consensus of various researchers at our university. We need to support food production with the land we have today, and no more, and therefore we don't agree with any kind of integration of new lands. And here too we need, of course, a collective agreement among us, and this would bestow on these communities, or would encourage greater consensus. Now, where we are, in Monte Nativo, there is a very present community, and I like it very much. And in Monte Nativo, there is a minimal surface in order to reach the objectives which we decided. So, a small contribution as far as yesterday's topic is concerned, as far as the communities of origin and ancestral knowledge is concerned. Both the regional economy of our country in the area of Cuyo, the area in the north, as well as the area above Córdoba, the zero-mile food is essential. Every day we eat food which is local, and that includes food produce, vegetable produce, eggs and meat. These animals often are reared in areas near our city, and behind those farms are small producers, farmers. In the case of agricultural farming in our country, most of the work is carried out by Bolivians. In those niches of production, there is a lot of knowledge, a lot of ancestral knowledge, and a lot of farming knowledge, traditional knowledge, which has been inherited from previous generations. And I believe it is of paramount importance to relate all this with the theme we have today. You spoke to us about a necessary space for production, and we need to reinvent, reconfigure that space, respecting biodiversity and natural architecture. I believe, therefore, that it's necessary to give importance to these forms of knowledge which have been made invisible. We need to recover these. We need to bring these to the fore once again, and therefore we need to re-establish that knowledge in order to go to a productive space which is biodiverse and which is more in line with the stewardship of the environment and with the best practices in the environment. It's very important to work on this. I work a lot with the Bolivian community, and there is a whole host of knowledge there which is with great value. I would just like to say this. Thanks. I have two questions which come from Zoom. One is Enrique from Patagonia in Argentina, and he says it is true that in Argentina the use of phosphate are not forbidden. If this is true, why, if it's forbidden, then why are we still using this product? I actually did not know that it was forbidden, and I did know that there was an influence on the part of the United States. Further question from Zoom. Marina from Buenos Aires, who says, how do we generate from citizenship this space of dialogue in order to guarantee a territorial structure, legal structure, which is in line with needs, as economic interest goes beyond any will to go beyond a legal framework? We need to widen the space of citizenship. Argentina has the good fortune of having various research centers, and there are many universities. There's LINTA, the National Institute for Farming, Animal Husbandry Technology. This is a study center which goes beyond this city. It's countrywide, and this helps to raise awareness throughout the citizenship. At the same time, we need to abandon the juxtaposition of the producer who's an assassin and an enemy, especially on the part of those who are in the city. Those who live in the city live in an artificial environment, and in that case, anybody who's in town cannot always hunt for food on their own. They need a mediator, and the farming producer, the person, the cattle rearer as well, is somebody who must be close to the city. They are mediators. Obviously, in every form of commerce, there are economic interests, and in like all human endeavors, there may be a certain negative social impact. We can mitigate that impact. First of all, we need to raise awareness among those who do not know nature, invite people to have a walk in nature, to see nature. It's also crucial to speak with those who work in farming and animal farming establishments, and this is important. Another question from Zoom. I'm not sure whether you have interesting questions from Rome, but I'll read this one in the meantime. In Argentina, as well as in other countries, the agroecology, farming ecology is growing, which is the multifunctional management of farmland, but it's also a lifestyle which then sees a translation in social sustainability as well as economic sustainability. But in general, it moves forward on a rather small scale. What do you think? Well, certainly I showed you how we can bring forward a policy on a broader scale, because in Argentina we have 30 million hectares. I'm not sure what the number is in Italy. So we wish to go towards an organic farming. Yes, we can, and this is happening to some extent, but there will be a very significant fall in production if we only went in that direction. Therefore, how can we support production by mitigating the environmental impact? And these would be the ideas that I've tried to transmit to you. In a certain way, ecological ideas are linked to agronomical ideas, and therefore we need to deepen this dialogue even within our sector. Very good. So thank you, Gabriel. I'm not sure if there's anything from Rome, perhaps from Castel Gandolfo. Do you have any questions? Do you have any reflections? Luca. I did have a couple of reflections. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Espósito, who has used Copernicus European satellites in his slides, so we are happy about this. And it was very interesting to see the use of laser for getting rid of weeds. I hadn't seen a robot destroying weeds yet, so that's very interesting. There would be many observations to carry forward, including the relationship between the animal and the vegetable through this circularity, and this is certainly an example of relationality which supports sustainability. So this is a concrete example of this which we have been talking about in the last few days. I think one of the themes that wasn't mentioned, one is that of protests, street protests, and farmers and population, and this is a very hot topic in Europe. I was quite surprised because there were farmers in the squares and we couldn't leave our offices, and this has they've also caused some trouble along some squares near the European Parliament. But one thing that could be very interesting, two questions, and we'll see how you wish to answer. One is whether the production of proteins on the part of vegetables can also be an answer for the need for proteins. And in Europe, GMOs, which genetically modified organisms, cannot be used. Whereas I think in Argentina, they can be used. Can they be part of the solution? What do you think? Is this justified? Is there a fear for this? And is the fear justified? So I suppose there are two questions.
Bien, en primer lugar, la producción de proteínas de origen vegetal.
So first of all,
Argentina ha sido líder porque justamente eso se llama el cultivo.
First of all, vegetable origin protein are Argentina is a leader in this field, particularly for soy. We know that this is a kind of production which is used mainly for oil. Soya has a lot of proteins, and so it's used as a protein oil. So nearly all fodder for farm animals and also for pets, food for pets, has soy and corn flour. Clearly, animals often eat soy and corn, including chickens and cattle. Soy is just one option, and there are also vegetable protein options, but we keep going towards pure agriculture, and I'm convinced that this is not sustainable, but there needs to be a rotation with animals. On the other hand, OGMs. I believe that these are not a threat for human consumption, but they are very young, and these only have 15-20 years, so I'm not sure, they're not well known. We don't know if there is collateral effects or long-term effects for human consumption. On the other hand, I think they are fundamental in order to bring about some solutions. For example, if we did not have certain OGMs, the load of pesticides in crops would be much more significant. Therefore, there is a complexity we need to deal with, and this is a complexity which is complicated in itself. So a balance on the one hand can be an imbalance on the other. There needs to be a social consensus on how to produce future food.
E quindi ripasso la parola a Mariflor.
So I give the floor to Mariflor again now. So I want to thank Gabriel Espósito. And so we'd like now to give the floor to the topic of energy transition. And for this I invite here Miss Aurora.
Nos acompañan entonces en este momento.
So for this moment we are going to listen to Professor Miguel Delgado from the Catholic University of Bolivia. And Aurora Franca Souza from the University of Sao Paulo, and who teaches at the University of Sofia for Latin American and Caribbean, and the Foundation Herminio Ometto. So we have a cultural richness here, so from Bolivia and from Brazil, but also for the interpreters. We'll need interpreters because the presentation will be the first part in Spanish and then in Portuguese. So with Aurora, each one speaks her own languages and we understand each other, but it is good to have. So we begin with Professor Delgado.
Muy buenos días a todos los presentes acá en Córdoba.
So good morning to all those in Córdoba and those who are attending online, and good afternoon to to those from the North Hemisphere. So we want to look at things from the point of view of energy. This is an effort to understand the human presence. So what are the features that should have this process, in this case, the energy transition process, so that they respect not only environmental but also social justice. These features that we consider very important from a physical environmental point of view will be dealt with by my colleague Aurora Franca Souza. But we have to consider the phenomenon of energy and what we intend, what we mean by energy transition. So the first thing is to remember the importance that energy has for contemporary society. It is unthinkable in our society the way we know it, with all the comfort we enjoy, without the participation of energy. The issue of energy is always present in human life since the very first primordial steps of human evolution. Here there are two graphs. The left graphic dates back to the 1970s, and so the digits are different now, the figures are different now, but the concepts, we still find them in present society. So if we look at the X line, energy, different quantities, let's look when it talks about calories, kilocalories per day. On the vertical axis, we have several steps of human evolution according to the categories that the authors classified. Like we can see that in the first steps, humans consumed 2,000 kilocalories per day. And they need that to keep the body well, so with an endosomatic energy consumption. Then, with the evolution of society, human needs for calories grow more and more, and we get to the moment where the exosomatic consumption, so which is not only to maintain biologically live, maintain the body biologically alive, has grown in excess. On top, we see the needs of energy in other sectors. For example, the food sector, then the housing sector, industry and agriculture, and transport. Then another point of view, if you look at economic development, on the right hand we have another graphic. We see I will use the word highly developed countries, high-income countries, and they are those that consume more energy, the highest quantity of energy. So there is a correlation between growth, consumption of energy, and per capita income. Here, there is a proposal by an economist that we know very well in South America, from Chile, Manfred Max Neef, who is also a philosopher. And he introduces the issue from different economic points of view in relation to development. He says, why don't we consider human evolution considering an indicator? I called it ecological person, ecoson. So how much energy a person consumes, including the basic needs, without imagining any extra. So let us imagine human evolution, economic development per capita, but according to their expression in terms of consumption of energy resources. So the consumption of energy grows on the left-hand side. We see the data on a global level. It doesn't matter if they're more or higher or lower, but they are growing constantly. The impression is that it will grow towards the infinite. On the right hand instead, these are the greenhouse effect gas production. We have a problem in some sectors. With the blue color, you have, in terms of consumption, energy is one of the highest. That is the highest contribution, because the consumption is based especially on fossil fuels. One of the reasons for which fossil fuels are used is for the quantity of energy they can produce, which is very high. This is one of the reasons. It is not the only reason, actually. So we are in a situation where society requires more and more energy, and more it will continue to make emissions of carbon dioxide. Many studies have been made about the production of CO2 into the atmosphere. This issue is present at all institutional levels and all researchers, and it is one of these. Now, the United Nations different impact on different sectors. The CO2 production that has different effects on the planets, and in which ecosystems and what ways it can cause a greater impact. The dark color indicates the highest impact, and here we can see what is produced at different levels. And also we have to remember what are the technologies that produce more quantities of CO2, more emission of CO2 into the atmosphere. We see in this graphic the production, the CO2 from different types of technologies. Some of them have a very high production, and these are connected to carbon. The highest is the quantity of carbon used in the world, while the low emissions are what we know as renewable energy. In this case, wind energy, solar energy, and so the CO2 production by renewable sources is much, much lower than the one produced by fossil fuels. So we have technologies that can be an interesting alternative for the CO2 emissions. Here we have another graphic that make us recognize what are the technologies we are using, but in different steps of the life cycle, like construction, manufacturing, beginning with carbon, we have oil, we have hydroelectric, we don't have wind energy here, etc. So in the different steps, the technology that is conventional and technologies that is used are those that produce more CO2 in the different steps, and those that produce less CO2 are especially wind and solar energy. So when we talk about these, those that produce more or less CO2, so the trend to migrate from fossil fuel-based production to alternative energy sources production. And now I give the floor to Aurora, my colleague, who will explain some specific features. So the consumption of energy from sources from fossil fuels is one of the meaningful sources that produce greenhouse effect, and as a consequence they produce climate changes. So so that is why I want to quote the COP23 in Dubai in 2023. In the COP, they made a balance, global balance sheet of what has been lived in order to implement the Paris Agreement. So the use of fossil fuels, transition from fossil fuel energy system into the use of alternative sources for the target of zero emissions. So leaving behind the use of fossil fuel energy production in an ordered and equitable way by accelerating the action in this decade with the objective of getting to zero emission by 2050, according to what scientists propose. And there was a recognized need for a just, equitable energy transition that is intended as a process of transformation that considers the economic dimension, the social, cultural dimension, and the environmental issues at stake. So there is a need to observe, respect the principles that lead to the promotion of social justice and climate justice, and needed an equitable access to clean energy and the guarantee of social inclusion from the original communities that are affected by this reality. So in this case, we should pay attention so that energy transition models are not imposed with the predominance of profit motives that eventually reproduce injustices, inequalities, and the imposition of power. So care must be taken to ensure to avoid these. So I repeat, we have to avoid the reproduction of injustices, inequalities, and the imposition of power in order not to jeopardize the cultural and socio-environmental context of local communities. So, to prevent this from happening, the energy transition must go through transparent decision-making processes that guarantee the necessary mechanisms to promote an effective participation and the involvement of everyone in decision-making and policy formulation. This means that the players that are most impacted locally by energy policies are the very ones who should play a leading role in discussions and therefore should be included in these decision-making processes. And we have an example here concerning Argentina, which is a great producer of lithium. Lithium is a metal that is very important for energy transition because the batteries to produce clean energy are lithium batteries, so that it is impossible not to consider lithium in this energy transition process. And these would produce a damage to the communities that live in the areas where lithium is extracted. Even in Brazil, when we talk about energy transition and also water, the use of water, of hydroelectric, or so-called hydroelectric energy production, there are very often big damages to local populations. And the importance of Aboriginal people is very important, and this will guarantee the policy of energy transition in line with the objectives of environmental sustainability goals, particularly SDG 7 and SDG 13 that promote social justice. Then another challenge to be faced in this energy transition process is the possibility of greenwashing, as we call it. This is presenting an energy production alternative with the image of environmental responsibility while maintaining practices that are not sustainable. There are regions in Brazil that have been emptied in order to extract this green oil, which has a lower impact, but they create many problems of public health on a territorial level. So we have to progress in this in the implementation of these public policies aimed at the energy transition that ensure the sustainable use of natural resources, as well as the right of indigenous peoples and their effective participation in decision-making, and also the accessibility of clean quality energy for all, without neglecting the integral environmental education of citizens, leading societies to incorporate into their notion of rational energy use and to recognize that a dignified life is also possible with lower energy needs. In this context, we can look at the contribution that the new paradigm brought about by relational sustainability makes to the just energy transition, which will only be achieved if there is a collaboration between the natural, social, and human sciences with the intention of seeking a more sustainable and dignified planet for future generations through dialogue with all our citizens. So we consider that relational sustainability can be a contribution to create social and environmental justice. Thank you.
Agradecemos entonces a Miguel, Aurora, por sus ponencias.
So we thank Miguel, Aurora, for their contributions, and we open a space for debate. I'm not sure whether Luca would like to say something, or shall we go? I think an applause is in order, or they've heard it. And the same applause on the part of Castel Gandolfo from Rome. I'm not sure whether we wish to begin from here for this time, if there are any questions, or perhaps on Zoom. Is there anybody else on Zoom who wishes to ask a question?
Altrimenti chiedo qui alla sala se ci sono delle domande.
Otherwise, I'll ask here if there are any questions. They're a little bit shy.
Forse c'è le faccio io un paio di domande.
Perhaps I'll ask a couple of questions then, whilst Castel Gandolfo finds its feet.
Anzi, veramente le domande sono tre.
Actually, there are three questions. I'm sure you can share them up between you. One is whether you believe that energy efficiency may play a role as before producing energy, perhaps we need to think about how not to waste energy. The second question is a great debate today at a European Union level, and this pertains to nuclear energy. There is a great debate on the use, the advantages, the disadvantages of nuclear energy. The third question is about artificial intelligence. We believe today that powerful computers that will power AI will be energy consuming, and within a decade the great actors of computation of internet will monopolize energy and to the detriment of rural disadvantaged societies, because there will be no energy available as the great players of artificial intelligence will monopolize this. I'm not sure whether you wish to comment on these three themes.
Bien, el tema de eficiencia energética es correcta la apreciación, Luca.
So concerning energy efficiency, what you have said is correct, Luca. We need to see what we have. We don't need to increase our installations. We need to see how efficient we are as it stands. We need to analyze, we need to study, we need to correct all the inefficiencies and all the losses, the waste we have. This applies to industry or to a private home. There are various studies which prove that if we were simply more efficient and a little bit more intelligent too at that, because we need to know when we need to use energy, then we would reduce the needs of the energy system by a lot. This happens systematically and significantly. Energy efficiency is a responsibility on everybody's part. As far as nuclear energy is concerned, this is a topic which is subject to lots of debate, especially in Europe. Polarized debate. The most crucial observations we heard where nuclear energy still exists are linked to that of safety and security, meaning the risk that a nuclear installation might have, and the way we went was to reduce the contribution of nuclear energy to the total amount. There are some countries where this is very elevated, such as in France. It's very high. Nuclear energy is very high percentage of the total, and to reduce this is quite onerous. So I won't give a final opinion. I recognize that this is a big debate, but my observation is safety and the threats that might reach us on nuclear installations on the part of terrorist groups. The third question on artificial intelligence. Well, what I would say is that in the United States they are firing up some nuclear power plants in order to feed the servers for AI. These are servers that work with AI that's not linked to the system, an interconnected system dealing about nations and so on. But these are systems which are isolated only for that aim, for AI. Now, this is what's happening. And AI servers will need a lot of energy, and they are thinking, that we are considering the option to keep a separate grid of energy for this, but this is where the issue of lithium comes into play. The capacity to cover these needs is essential. I can't give clear answers, but I just want to continue to talk about these observations. These topics need greater analysis, I think.
É que não existem fontes energéticas 100% limpas. Portanto, a energia nuclear.
There are no forms of energy which are clean 100%. Nuclear energy, for example, even though it is considered to be clean, as well as the issue of safety and security, also displays the dimension of uranium, which and its residue, the depleted version generated by this, and those residues emanating from production. These need to be dealt with, so it's not possible to say that this energy is 100% clean, and no other energy can be considered 100% clean. This aspect needs to be borne in mind when we assess which energy is the most interesting for us. When it comes to this use only exclusively for AI, I too believe that every time in history has seen a new situation. Today we have AI. If we go back to the Industrial Revolution, the energy requirements were to move the machines in the industry, and that was the most important thing at that time. Today, we believe it's artificial intelligence, and therefore we destine energy to this. But we can never stop thinking about using energy. This is very important. It's inconceivable. In Africa, for example, women need to walk kilometers in order to collect firewood, to warm water, to have a shower, for example, whereas in rich countries we use billions and billions for energy installations. So all this needs to be considered.
Bueno, tengo aquí una pregunta de Vincenzo Ciocci en italiano, pero bueno, la tradujeron acá, me hicieron esta ayuda.
I have a question here.
Quisiera preguntar qué se puede hacer cuando se quiere utilizar una
And the question is, what can we do when we wish to use a renewable source of energy, but we cannot reach an agreement with local populations?
Sí, a ver, estoy tratando de entender la pregunta. Supongo que se refiere a lo que llamamos un autoproductor, es decir, una persona, una vivienda.
I think you are referring to people who want to be self-sufficient to produce their own energy, the energy that they will need.
Necesidad energética no siempre es posible.
There are certain persons who wish to reach 100% of their consumption and be sustainable. This is not always possible, not so much for technical reasons, but due to economic regulations, technical regulations, because if everybody wished to produce their own energy, then they wouldn't need the energy supplier or the grid. And that would generate a range of problems. We need to, because the price of energy then would vary from area to area, especially if we depend on renewable sources. And certain times it would be in a lower tier, and other times at a higher price. So the entry of new players into the energy field means a greater cost. So there are themes and topics which are linked to economics, which make this difficult, complicated. So I think I understand that this relationship with the community, with the situation we find ourselves in, well, this can be interpreted from a range of points of view. For example, if the community is in disagreement with us, in disagreement with a certain kind of energy installation, then sometimes this happens, but in places where soil use is very valuable. For example, if we have a soil which is precious for agriculture and for the community, they will not agree to eliminate crops in order to install solar panels, for example, or to sacrifice a forest which has a value or tourist or religious poignancy in order to cut it down and install solar panels. The community would not allow this. So sometimes we see conflicts of interest which simply exist, which is simply there, and we need to deal with this. We were talking with Aurora at the beginning. We need to set up an energy transition, also with a sense of social justice, not just in an environmental sense, which certainly will be important, but we also need to incorporate the social side. We need to speak, we need to talk.
agradecemos. Por esto quería también comentar que ayer
We thank you for your questions, and I'd like to say that yesterday here in Cordoba we had the opportunity to hold a round table where Professor Delgado was accompanying us and where renewable energy was discussed, as well as sustainability and so on. And this gave us the opportunity to hold a dialogue with Professor Rocci, who came from the hydrogen company of Argentina. And these things were assessed because Aurora said to me that not all energies are 100% clean. No energies are 100% clean, and even these new developments like green hydrogen also has environmental problems pertaining to the use of water and lithium and other elements which perhaps we will need to assess in order to understand how to reach energy use which is 100% sustainable. If I may ask a question, Miguel, you talked about social justice. Fossil fuels are in the hands of very few powerful people. There is a risk that renewable energy remain also in the hands of few people who have the power in their hands of the entire world. Do you forecast development, especially of energy communities which are distributed, so clean energy distributed, so that this may be equal and may reach many, may reach everybody, hopefully, but not with dirty energy, of course, not with polluting energy, but with clean energy.
O uso dos combustíveis fósseis, acho que não é acabar, ainda estamos. No entanto, há necessidade do uso dessas energias limpas. Como você falou, o combustível fóssil ainda está na mão.
I'm sorry, the translation is not reaching us at this time.
Mas há essa necessidade desta bolsa.
We'll resume the English as soon as we can.
De energia que consideremos limpas. A América Latina e o Caribe, eles têm um potencial para energias limpas grandioso, por conta dos nossos ventos, da nossa luminosidade, da nossa condição hídrica. No entanto, nesses últimos tempos, também foi a região onde mais se prospectou a presença de petróleo e outros combustíveis fósseis. Então, nós vemos que, mesmo falando em transição energética, em busca de...
Apologies, we're just waiting for a translation signal to reach us, then we'll be able to resume on the English channel.
Fontes novas para a energia fóssil. E isso, eu acredito que ainda vamos demorar algum tempo para que essa transição justa aconteça. Mas que vai acontecer é uma necessidade, porque nós estamos vivenciando todo o problema ambiental causado pelo uso das energias fósseis. E vai passar a ser uma necessidade de sobrevivência no planeta. Então, mesmo que demore, eu acredito que no futuro,
even though it will take time,
não como talvez prevê os documentos,
the situation we find ourselves in derives from fossil fuels, and therefore change is necessary. Perhaps things will not occur as the United Nations have envisaged.
La verdad que bueno, se ve que es un tema que está suscitando mucho interés. Hay dos personas en el chat que quieren intervenir. Yo lo que les diría es que justamente por
It seems a very interesting topic. There are two people who wish to come in from the chat, so you can decide who wishes to come forward. But please, could you be as brief as possible? So we say hello to our good friend Juan de la Riva, our Spanish friend. Certainly, Juan, you can speak in Spanish, right?
Hola, buenas tardes, buenos días. Saludos, María Flor, Luca. Muchas gracias por la oportunidad de conectarme online.
Hello, Maria Flor. Hello, Luca. Thank you for this opportunity. Because I am not in Castel Gandolfo, but thank you to online. I'm here with you today. I'm not sure if it's a question.
Quindi, so what we said before about the projection of phosphates as a source of energy, and this is important in a context like this, where there are people coming from very different countries and contexts. So we shouldn't lose by sight the principle that of the differentiated responsibility. That is, in the context of socio-environmental crisis, all the countries and all societies and all territories, including Europe, they do not have the same responsibility because they don't have the same problems, nor they have the same opportunities to have fast progress towards change. I say this because someone in the chat has shared a piece of information about leaf phosphate that in Spain is among the first countries that produce these matter, but they are not prohibited in Europe. In Europe, there is no prohibition, and there was a moratorium of 10 years, and the use of lethal phosphates is terrible, especially in underground water, the use of underground water and contamination of underground water. So in terms of biological agriculture, there is a problem of effectiveness, and there are forms of agriculture that rescue forms of relationship from the in front of the big present changes. That is, there is a connection with the natural ecosystem, agricultural system. And also, in the case of energy, I am involved into an initiative of renewable energy, and Spain is a great producer of renewable source of energy. So what problems we have here in Spain? The problem is that we have a strong impact on the environment and also on society. So for this, training is important, and also information. And the lack of consensus with local agents for the definition of a strategy is very often an issue of disinformation, a problem of disinformation. So we have to accompany to participation. And let us not forget that there are many economic interests, like in the autonomous community of Aragon. There are strong economic interests and huge initiatives that go beyond rationality and that have a great impact. So if the panelists agree, these three expressions, differentiated responsibility, training, and information combined with participation. Thank you. So about differentiated responsibility, this is a principle, a good principle that is being applied in different areas. And in fact, calling the attention that we all have a slice of the cake in our hands. Maybe it is a small slice, but we all should all have one slice. But also we could interpret it as that those who have more responsibility are trying to co-responsibilize partners with a very low participation. So we have to consider this principle, but with some precautions according to the specific situations. Then about what you said about the development of renewable sources, you mentioned some concepts about training and information. Yes, these elements must be present, not only in promoting the sources themselves, but also for the owners of the lands. Because in some places not only training and information is used, but also the concept of previous consultation. Not only you have to be informed, but the whole community must be made aware and give their consensus. So these are the elements that we have to take into consideration. This concept of previous consultation is very important. Thank you very much. So, is it possible to give the floor to Sandra Mugnaioli and on her topic about climate? A short question. In the last conference about climate, there was no agreement because the developing countries did not accept to be considered at the same level of developed countries that already use their share of climate consumption, including China. So what can we do? Because there is this issue that there are shares of climate pollution that have favored in the past highly developed countries, and now developing countries are asking for paying the bill. I think that consensus will never get to a total consensus because it is too difficult. It is important to be aware that there are rights that must be equal for all when we talk about energy. And it is not possible that decisions are taken only by those who have the capability to pay. That is why we talk about equitable energy, so that there can be a participation of all. So consensus in the sense that both rich and poor countries can sit at the same table and have a discussion with each other on an equitable level. So, because very often economic power prevails and not the rights of having a balanced life with the comfort for all as a basic right.
Creo que ha sido un momento muy rico.
I think it was a very rich moment of sharing, and we can continue to go in depth on this issue, about this topic, so that the relation sustainability is built starting from this topic, this situation that we face collectively from the different points of view. So if Luca does not have anything more, we can greet you and have a good rest of the day, and we'll continue with our program, and we'll meet you in Castel Gandolfo tomorrow when the morning will begin for us.
Grazie infinite.
Yes, thank you very much. So here there is a lot of enthusiasm. They are. You hear the round of applause here from the Castel Gandolfo.